Okay, we're going to be learning about Mitzvot Tuluyot Ba'aretz, the mitzvahs connected to Eretz Yisrael. And the first thing to say is, like all mitzvot, it's based on spiritual principles. In other words, every halacha, every detail, every mitzvah has a spiritual foundation behind it. So learning Mitzvot Tuluyot Ba'aretz is a huge topic, but it doesn't make sense to jump into the details if you don't know the spiritual foundation of the mitzvot. It would be like someone who doesn't know anything about Shabbat, but they heard something about Shabbat and they would come to you and say, can you tell me how to keep Shabbat? What do you have to do to keep Shabbat? So there's two approaches. One could say, well, on Shabbat you can't drive, you can't turn on lights, and you can't cook, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. That's how you keep Shabbat. Or you could invite someone, you want to see how to do Shabbat? Come, we'll go to a nice Karlbach minyan. We'll have a great meal with guests and singing and discussing and learning. And the person comes for Shabbat, and that's how they learn about Shabbat. So the same thing, if we want to learn about Shemitah or Trugman Meiser, you have to start with what are the foundations behind it. So just so it's clear to everyone, the idea of Mitzvot Tuluyot Ba'aretz is a huge subject. And according to tradition, one of the reasons that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed 515 prayers to come into Eretz Yisrael is, one, because he wanted to experience the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, and also he wanted the opportunity to keep the mitzvot of Eretz Yisrael. For 40 years he taught about them, but none of them went into effect until we actually came into the land. And Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to keep the mitzvot that were connected to the land.
How many times?
515. In Parshat Ve'et Hanan, Ve'et Hanan is gematria 515. And it's also gematria tefillah. So the fact that he davened 515 prayers means that his entire tefillah was to come into Eretz Yisrael. So when we talk about Eretz Yisrael, we're talking about Truma and Meiser, Meiser Ani, Meiser Sheni, Leket, Shichacha, Peah, Kilayim, Klei Kerem, Orla, Neteravai, Bikurim, Chadash, Shmitah, Yovel, Chala, Demai, and along with that, then you could start adding other things like Tu B'Shvat, the bracha that we say on Rosh Chodesh Nisan for the trees. There are many, many halachas, especially brought in Mishnah Torah, about the environment, especially in a Jewish society in Eretz Yisrael. Rambam writes extensively about water pollution, air pollution, smell pollution, and all kinds of things about clean water and treatment of animals on the land. So we can see it's a huge subject. So I want to start with we'll call it a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchot B'tziat Pat, the laws of eating bread. So this is just such a perfect example of how every mitzvah has a spiritual foundation. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch itself, Yiten shtei yadav ala pat b'sha'at bracha. A person should put their 10 fingers on the loaf of bread, not just on Shabbat. Anytime you're eating, you should put all 10 fingers on the bread while you're...
10 fingers on the bread?
Yes, you should hold the bread and have all 10 fingers.
While sitting down.
Yeah. Sheyesh behen eser etzba'ot. Why? Because our hands have 10 fingers. Keneged yud mitzvot hatluyot bepat. Why are we putting 10 fingers? Because there are 10 mitzvot, which we're going to see in 1 second, that are connected to bread. I'll go back over that. V'lakach yesh yud tevot bebracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. 10 words. 10 fingers, 10 words for the bracha. V'yesh eser tevot b'pasuk, and I didn't have time to look this up. Matzmiach chatzir lebehema. I don't even see a source here where it's from. Okay, but we'll continue. V'yud tevot b'pasuk eini kol elecha yisaberu. In Ashrei, which we say 3 times a day, eini kol elecha yisaberu v'ata noten lehem achlam bi'ito. That the eyes of everyone are towards you and you provide food for everyone. 10 words. And there's also 10 words in the pasuk, Eretz chita v'sorah, v'gefen v'teina v'rimon, Eretz zeit shemen v'devash. 10 words. This is the cardinal pasuk about the 7 fruits of Eretz Yisrael. And there are 10 tevot in the pasuk. Vayiten lecha Hashem, vayiten lecha mital hashemayim, v'shmanei haaretz v'rov dagan v'tirosh. This is the bracha that Yitzchak gave to Yaakov. Remember, Yaakov comes in to get the blessing. This was the blessing, that God should give you of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and a fullness of grain and grapes. So this is in the Shulchan Aruch. This is like, here you have, what would seem a simple mitzvah. You put 10 fingers on your bread, but there are reasons for it. And so that's what we're going to learn today, is we're going to try to just look at the underlying reasons for the mitzvot tluot ba'aretz. So I've identified what I would call 3 themes that run through these mitzvot. And that is, and we'll go over this, the first one is that everyone should be taken care of. And we'll see how this applies. Everyone has to be taken care of.
That's a mitzvah? That's one of the mitzvahs?
No, what I'm saying is it's a theme. That whole list I just gave you, like 20 different things, 20 different mitzvot. So I'm trying to identify, well, what's the thread that's connecting them? What's running through them? So as we will see, one of them is that a Jewish society has to make provisions that no one falls through the cracks. And as
what about fast days? Fast days when you are not being, when you don't do this, when you're not being taken care of.
No, we're talking the bigger picture, as we'll see in a second. In other words, when we talk about Trugman and Meiser, today we take a little piece and we put it in a bag and we throw it in the garbage. As we're going to see, life was very different then. Trugman and Meiser, people lived from this. Now it's symbolic. It's the Rabbanan. Yeah, it's Zeker L'Mikdash. It's all very symbolic. But we're going to see how this theme runs through this. Everyone has to be taken care of. That there is a spiritual order to the universe, as we'll see. And it's our way of giving honor and love to the land. These are the three themes. Someone else could maybe express it a little bit differently, but the three again is that everyone needs to be taken care of, that there is a spiritual order that reflects itself in a physical order, we'll see in a second, and our way of showing our love and appreciation and connection to the land. Okay, so we're going to start with this idea of everyone is taken care of. Now, what's absolutely crucial here is to understand that the society that we're talking about at the time of the Torah was an agrarian society. People lived in cities. The only really big city in Eretz Yisrael was Yerushalayim. There were the Levim had 48 cities, but they weren't like huge metropolises that we think of today. It was basically an agrarian society. So when we're talking about Truma and Meiser and Leket, Shichacha, and Peah, this was what we would call today a modern welfare system. In other words, and especially let's say in America, there's always this big debate: should we just be giving money for free, or should people need to attempt to work? So the greatest tzedakah that you can do is to provide someone with a job that they can earn their own living. Giving people money also is great, but when you help someone provide for themselves, that's called the highest level. So we just read the book of Ruth. The whole book of Ruth is around these mitzvot. She went to the field. There wasn't bituach lumi to go to if you can't finish the month, or someone is incapacitated or whatever. So the way that the Torah provides is that first of all, Truma and Meiser went to the Kohanim and the Levim. They did not have land. They didn't own land. And they were considered like servants of the people. Like today, teachers, a moel, a shochet, whatever, people who served the community, these were the Kohanim and the Levim. So how are they going to make ends meet? So Trum and Meiser wasn't that you take a little bit and you throw it in the garbage as a remembrance. When people had huge fields and pardesim, and they would take 10%, you're not talking about a small amount of produce. This is, and the whole society was based around this. A huge section of the people lived off of Truma and Meiser. And of course, Peah, the corners of the field, and what is called Lechet and Shichacha, that when they would harvest the fields and they would forget some of the produce, they can't go back and take it. It's left for the poor, the widow, the homeless, the orphan. And when you're cutting the field, if you move on, you don't go and you didn't finish the grains or the row or the vegetable, you don't go back. That's called leket. Leket is you go leket. Lamed kuf. Taf or tet? I should know. Okay, and Peah, again, wasn't a small part. Okay, tet. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It's interesting because if they forgot, they're not allowed to go back. But you can say to yourself, well, I didn't forget. I had to, it was in the sun, I had to wait till it was in the shadow. It's like,
everything is before God. God knows our thoughts. God knows. The assumption is if God gave us a mitzvah,
There is no shade. There's no trees.
we're not
There's
going
a field.
we're not going to try to trick God.
That's it.
no,
Stay
they
in your row.
didn't forget.
What?
What was
Okay,
next?
that's already-
Leket is, let's say you're scything your field in a row, okay, and you're moving forward, right? Today we have machines, so you go like this, and then you're 4 or 5 steps, and you say, "Oh, I didn't get the whole row." You don't go back; you leave it. Shechacha is you've gathered it together, and a bundle falls off the agalah, or something like that. You don't go back to get it. And people would go to the fields, and this is how they would feed themselves. It was for real.
Shikha means
Forget, yeah,
forgetting.
yeah.
And what is
Leket means to gather, leket, to gather together. And peah means like peyot, the corner of your hair, the corner of your field.
Is this connected to when the Lubavitch Rebbe used to give out leket on Rosh Hashanah?
No. He would give out honey cake.
Yeah, honey cake. It was called leket, no?
No, lekach.
Oh, like
Lekach. Actually, it's in this ballpark of the same thing, but here's more to give out brachas. It wasn't to give people a livelihood.
Lekach is something like
Yeah,
the word
lekach.
lekachet, to
Yeah,
take.
yeah. It was like honey cake. Chabad. I used to go to Rav Ginsburg every Erev Yom Kippur to get a piece of honey cake.
1 second, Peah. How did the corner get left? You purposely had to leave?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Still close?
Yeah. And there, if we ever get there, we'll learn the measuring. There are different opinions how much of the field you have to leave, but it was on purpose. That was like a truma. It was like actually, the better word is maaser.
Tithe.
Yeah, tithe. That we're going to learn in a second. Okay, so I just want to show how a halacha can develop. Like, let's say we pick up a siddur today, and you look at the siddur and you think, that's how people have always davened. When you realize that it actually took around 3,700 years to get to the siddur that we have today. The same thing if you go to a wedding. You see how they do the chuppah and the sheva brachas and the ring and the ketubah, and it's like, it's always been like that. That's not true. It develops. So I just want to show you 3 stages of maaser. Maaser comes from the word eser, a tenth. That's what it is, a tithe. And do you know why the Mormons are the richest, I don't think even just church, the richest per capita religious organization? Because they have to tithe their income and give it to the church. It's not like a donation, it's a obligation.
Like Mas Haknasah,
Right.
the
Yeah,
government.
obligation, and everyone does it.
so. Who's rich? The people?
No, the church, the
Oh,
church,
Oh,
the church,
Yes.
the churches.
So the Beit Knesset should be the richest, because we should give out.
Yes, we should. Absolutely. It's also halacha for us to give meiser, not just our produce, our it's called our money.
Income.
Okay, so
If we give it to the Beit Knesset, what will they do with it?
But it's not a developed system here, so you can give it to people, you can give it to organizations.
yeah, that's a whole other discussion. Is meiser on your money, but that follows from giving meiser. Now, let's just see how this works. Do you remember after Avram fights a war because they took Lot as a captive? And he goes and he saves him and all the people of Sodom, and he brings him back. And Malchi Tzedek comes out to greet him. And so he says like this. V'yomer Melech. Okay. And then the king of Sodom offers Avram some of the spoil. And no, excuse me, I'm going back. I'm sorry. This is with Melchizedek. So Melchizedek says, "V'yevarchehu b'yomar." Melchizedek blessed Avram and said, "Baruch Avram le'el elyon, konei shemayim va'aretz." Blessed is Avram to the exalted God who owns heaven and earth. U'baruch el elyon asher migen tzarecha, and blessed is the God on high who has shielded you has shielded you. Vayiten lo ma'aser mikol. Avram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all of the spoil. Everything else he gave to the king of Sodom. He didn't take anything from himself. And the commentaries say that this was a precedent for in the future that we would give a tenth to the Kohanim. Melchizedek was considered, it actually says he was Kohen to God. He was considered like the high priest of the city it was called Shalem then. And it says, Avram gave him Ma'aser Mikol. Okay, now we go to Yaakov. We go to Yaakov when he has the dream of the ladder. And afterwards, so Yaakov says, to God, he says, if you'll provide for me bread to eat and clothes to wear, and you return me in peace to my father's house, you will be to me a God. And this stone, where he had the dream, he made a matzeva, he made like a monument. And he said, this will be the house of God. V'chol asher titen li aser asarenu lach. Everything that you will give me, he's talking to God, I will take a tenth and give to you. Because he just said this will be the temple of God. This will be the house of God. So here, it's like a prophetic that he's saying in the future, my children will take a tenth and will support the Kohanim and the Levi'im that will be working in the temple. So here you see it went from Avram to Yaakov. And then in Parshat Re'eh, so it just says, here now we have the mitzvah. Of course, Avram and Yaakov, this was coming from their own free will. But now we have the mitzvah. It says, Aser ta'aser et kol tevuat zarecha, hayotze hasadeh shana shana. You shall take a tenth, you shall tithe all of the produce of that which you plant, and everything that comes from the field every year. Shana, shana. Now it's a mitzvah. It's now a mitzvah. The Chazal make a drush on this. The question is, why does it say double language? Aser ta'aser. So the simple understanding is, make sure that you give maaser. But the Chazal read it like this, Aser ta'asher. They changed the sin to a shin. Ta'asher means you will become wealthy. And this is the idea that if you give a tenth of your income, God will give back to you many riches. And it's in one of the prophets where God says, this is one thing you can test me on. You can test me that if you give your portion I will open up the treasure houses of riches for you.
Wait. This is one thing you can test me on.
Yes.
There are more things that Hashem gave to such a weekend that he said
No.
you can test me on.
No.
This is the only one.
Explicitly, I think so.
So let's go over it. What is it? We're gonna test it.
Yes, again, it's. I think it's Malachi. I think it's in the book of Malachi, where God says that the prophet says in God's name, on this thing you can test me, that if you will give your portion, then I will open up the treasure houses of riches and to pay you back.
And Hashem did, and then Malachi tested Hashem on it.
I can only speak for myself, and we have been extremely makpid to give 1/10 of our income. You can give up to 20%, and we're very makpid on giving, and I could just say that God has been very good to us. That's all I can say. As my own testimony, is God has been very, very good to us. Okay.
We need to learn how to do it.
If we would continue this series, we will learn how to do it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה b'dbaro.
Amen.
You were talking about Maser Ksafim. Maser Ksafim, you just take a tax of your income and you give it to tzedakah.
Yeah, but
We're not talking about Maser in agriculture yet.
Like everything, there are many details. There's priority who you should give it to.
Yeah.
And it's, for many people, it's not as simple as you just give 1/10 of your income. A lot has to do with your expenses. A lot of it has to do if you can't end the month yourself. There are many, many stipulations. But yes, simply, you take the paycheck that you take home, and you take 1/10 of it, just regularly.
After tax.
Well, yeah, because we're not talking about brutto; we're talking about netto. That's what your salary check, not what you have to pay to the government and all of that. You're already paying 20-25% to the government, but still, what you get in hand, that is called Meiser Kesafim. Okay, now, because I do want to go through this whole idea, we just did this whole thing about how no one should fall through the cracks, that kind of thing. And again, I have to emphasize very, very strongly that it was a different society then, and Trugman Meiser, the way we do it now, is just like a remembrance. It's symbolic. But then it was for real, and it worked. It was, like I said, there was no Bituach Lumi office then. It's just, that's one of there were other ways though. There are other ways. Ma'ot chitin, like before Pesach. It was an obligation to make sure that everyone had enough to make Pesach. And of course the prophets, time after time after time, extolled the people to take care of the widow, the homeless, the orphan, over and over and over again. This was the type of society that we had to set up.
This surplus of food that is
Correct.
wasted.
Correct. People live very, very differently then. Very, very differently. Okay.
Different diet also.
Very different diet. Very different diet. When we get to
shipped in from California,
right.
Or coconut milk from Indonesia. It's a different world.
Okay, so the next one is that the idea of there is an order to the physical and the spiritual universe. So how does this play out with Mitzvot Tluyot Ba'aretz? So this is where you would talk about kilayim, mixtures. Some of it is like, why can't we mix wool and linen? Why can't we plant two grains next to each other, too close to each other, or by the rabbis, two vegetables in a vineyard. You have to keep plants away from the vines. Like what all of this is about. And then when you add to this the whole idea of Shemitah, as we're going to see in a minute, just like we work 6 days a week and we rest on the seventh, we work 6 years and we rest on the seventh. There's an order, there's a spiritual order, and it's reflected in the physical reality, our physical reality. So this, we're not going to spend more time on that, but that is a very important thing. Of course, Yovel comes every 50 years. In other words, there is a archetypal paradigm of time that we try to fit in, because God says that this is the paradigm. 6 days you work, and the seventh you rest. 6 years you work, and the seventh you rest the land. Because there's an order. And the same thing with Kalaim is the main idea, is this idea of not mixing things that don't belong together. That's why you can't plow with a donkey and an ox together, because one is stronger than the other, and it's called Tsar Balei Chaim. But it's like a type of a mixture. And in the Torah, there's a juxtaposition at one point when they talk about different sexual relations in juxtaposition to Kalaim. So there's certain sexual relationships that are considered improper mixture of physical and emotional attachments. Okay, now the third thing, and this is probably the most important when we're talking about Shemitah, but this is very important altogether, is our relationship to the land. Because so many of these mitzvot, like I said in the beginning, is to show our love and honor for the land. So this has to do, of course, with Shemitah, with Yovel, with Bikurim. I don't know if I mentioned Bikurim. The Mishnayot on Bikurim are so gorgeous. They describe how we used to bring the first fruits. It is so inspirational. It gives you a picture of not just what life was like then, but how people related to the land. So if we go all the ways back, the deepest connection is the connection of Adam. We all come from Adam and Adamah. Adam and Adamah. This is an intrinsic connection, our connection to the earth in general, even outside of Eretz Yisrael. There is an intrinsic, essential connection between the human body and soul and the land itself. The first covenant that God made with Avram was on the land of Eretz Yisrael. And that was at Brit Bein Betarim, when Avram says, how will I know that I'll inherit the land? God mentioned a couple of times. First of all, this first thing he says to Avram is, Lech lecha me'artzecha, el ha'oretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you. So God had already picked out Eretz Yisrael. It wasn't like he said to Avram, check out the world, wherever you think is the best, I'll give that to you. No, God had already picked out Eretz Yisrael for Avram. In other words, not only was there a connection as being an Adam, but there was an intrinsic connection between the Jewish neshama and Eretz Yisrael.
God didn't pick out Israel. God made Israel.
Yeah, right. He made everything. But you're right. Actually, so that you mentioned that. So if we're talking about like primordial. So there's many different reasons given for why God created the world. Truthfully, we don't know. It's our conjecture why God created the world. So what's considered the most enigmatic and the deepest is V'hitaveh HaKadosh Baruch Hu liyot lo dira b'tachtonim, that God had a desire, hitaveh, taiva, God had a desire to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds. And then in Psuki de Zimra that we say every day, we say, Ki bachar Hashem b'tzion, Iva lemoshav lo. That God chose Zion. Iva is ta'ava. He had a desire, lemoshav lo, to dwell in the land of Eretz Yisrael. So when we talk about the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, it's holy because, as we say in the book of Devarim, that the eyes of God are on the land, meaning the land of Eretz Yisrael, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. That's what we learn about, that Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment. It says that the eyes of God always represents God's providence. And of course, Rosh Hashanah is all about the judgment, the providence that everyone is being dealt with. And the verse before that, it says it's a land that God seeks out. God's eyes are on the land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So when we talk about Eretz Yisrael and we talk about the mitzvot of Eretz Yisrael, we have to keep this in mind. We have to keep in mind that this land is special to us. It's special to a lot of people in the world. I cannot tell you, I'm sure you've experienced this, and we've done a lot of traveling, and we meet people all over, and they find out you're from Israel, and especially non-Jews, and they're like, oh, I've always wanted to go to the Holy Land. Or, I went to Israel once. It was the experience of my lifetime. This is a holy land. It's a special place. But our connection to it through the mitzvot is the way that we acknowledge that, number one, that God gave us this land, and that it's such a gift, but that it's important to God how we treat the land. And that's why when we learn about Shemitah, it's called a Shabbat Lashem. Shemitah is called a Shabbat Lashem. So it says, Ki tavo el haaretz, when you come into the land, asher ani noten lechem, that I am giving you, v'shavta haaretz Shabbat Lashem, that the land, you will rest the land. It's a Shabbat for God. It's a Shabbat for God. So that in itself, just the wording is important. But here we see something very, very deep, and we can learn this from another place. It's either in Kedoshim or Achrei Mot, where it says not to go after all of the practices of the people who lived here before you, because it's an abomination. And it says, and if you do, the land will vomit you out. So the wording isn't that God will vomit you, make you leave. The actual language is the land itself will vomit you out.
Scorpions, snakes.
Yeah. And we can see this, we say it every day in the second passage of the Shema, where it says, if you do the mitzvot and you listen to Hashem, God will give you the rain in its season, and the animals will have everything they want. You'll have everything you want, and you'll have everything. But if you don't listen and you don't do the mitzvot, God will shut up the heavens and there will be no rain and you will be forced to leave. So this is part of the brit, the covenant with the land. That the land has to be treated in a certain way, and we have to live on the land. Even now we're not talking about the Mitzvot Year, but if there's killing and adultery and idol worship, the land can't handle it. There's another place where it says that if you spill blood unrighteously, again, the land cannot handle that. The land will react in a way. And we see it in the physical world very, very much when you talk about the environment. If you treat the land in a certain way, it's only a matter of time before the land itself reacts in a way that is very negative. It was very negative. So, but what this implies, and this is like the deepest level, is we treat the land like it has a soul. The Ari talked about this a lot. We know that animals have souls, we have souls, and now we know also that vegetation has a certain level of consciousness. Not claiming that we really understand it quite yet, but they've done enough scientific experiments to know that there is a certain, beyond just reacting, there's a certain consciousness that plants have. The Ari went one step further. He said, everything, the stones, the mountains, the rivers, everything has a spark of God. It can't exist without a spark of God.
Everybody who works the land knows that.
Yes?
Did Ari
Yes.
work in the land? Did he do know so? Because the Rashi, he was...
Yes, you're right. No, not necessarily. He sat in isolation for 20 years with Eliyahu and Navi, learning Yom V'Laila. And then he came to Tzfat for 2.5 years, and then he passed away.
Yeah, but when he was living with Eliyahu, he still ate. He had to find a way to gather something.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Meal mark on him.
Somehow he actually, to be honest, his uncle was very, very wealthy. And no, that's the thing. The Ari was born in Yerushalayim. When his father passed away, his mother had no way of support. Her brother lived in Egypt and was very, very wealthy. And he said, come, I will take care of you. And so he took care of the family. When the Ari went to Tzfat, he no longer had that connection. Many people don't know this. The Ari opened a store. He opened a store. It was kind of like a hardware store. And he did have to provide for his family. And it was too far of a distance now. So
He had a family, he had...
Yeah.
His wife,
Yeah,
but we don't know
yeah.
anything about it.
Not much.
There's
Not much.
Luria family.
Sure.
Shalayim.
Sure. The Luris of Yerushalayim, they're direct descendants. They have a family tree. And by the way, Netanyahu is also a direct from, because the Luris are mishpacha with Netanyahu. That's why when Danny Roth married Netanyahu's daughter, they had a son. The Brit was at the Luris, and Netanyahu came. It was there. Anyways, we have about 10 more minutes. So this idea, the Ari was saying everything has, again, we're calling it a soul, but if you look in modern physics, quantum physics, it's startling, but you can look it up online. They now understand that individual atoms and individual particles also have consciousness. You can read about it. It's like for real. They've done many, many experiments. They do not understand it. It's like baffling, absolutely baffling. But the most elemental particles of the universe seem to exhibit a certain amount of choice and consciousness. But this is how we relate to Eretz Yisrael.
I remember Sarah Snyder, Julie Snyder.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote something once. I read that a rock doesn't move because it has so much awe of Hashem, it can't move.
Huh? Actually, it's called.
Potato also. People sit and watch TV. Potato man.
It's called the minerals are called domem, silent. But they're silent because of their awe of Hashem. Okay, so in the 10 minutes that we have left, I want to introduce Shemitah, and just again, I just want to get the spiritual foundations of Shemitah before we jump into the halachas, because we have to understand what it's based on. So we already said it's called a Shabbat l'Hashem. So, in relationship to God, we are, as it were, the female. In other words, all of creation is like the female, and even though it's not popular today because of gender politics, but we refer to God as He, even though we talk about the Shekhinah all of the time, which is a feminine concept. The presence of God is a feminine concept. But nonetheless, God as creator, we relate to as He, and all of creation. The first word of the Torah, Bereshit, the permutation is Ashrei Bat. The first and last letter of Bereshit is Bat. Is happy or happy is the daughter. That's what all creation is. But our relationship to Shabbat and to the land, we are the, as it were, the masculine, and Shabbat and the land is the feminine. That's why it fits into this concept called Mother Earth. We understand that. And first of all, Adamah is a feminine word. Adamah. But like Shabbat, we say, Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala. Shabbos is called a Kala. We relate to Shabbos as the Shabbos bride. And we relate to the land as our bride. And that's one of the secrets of Shir HaShirim, is that it's a love story between God and Israel.
And the nations also are in there.
The nations are in there also. But all of the imagery is Eretz Yisrael. All of the poetic imagery surrounds Eretz Yisrael. And because there's the same kind of love between God and Israel is our love for the land. And God's love for the land. Remember, Ki Bachar Hashem B'Tzion Eva L'Moshav Lo. God had a desire to make for Himself a dwelling place in the lower worlds. So when we talk about Shemitah, it's definitely harder because it comes once every 7 years. But we have to understand the way society was set up in an agrarian society. Shemitah was just like our whole week revolves around Shabbos. Already on Monday or Tuesday, am I going away for Shabbos? Am I having guests? When am I going to go shopping? Everything revolves around Shabbos. If you go on vacation, you have to plan, where am I going to be for those Shabbos? Like everything revolves around Shabbat. In the society then, everything revolved around Shemitah. Because your whole economic reality is you're not going to be planting during Shemitah. You have to plan well in advance. And we don't have time now, but there are ways that people could really keep Shemitah if they planned ahead. Just like you don't start cooking 5 minutes before Shabbos. Some people start on Thursday, Wednesday. Shalom does it 5 minutes before, but not
3 minutes.
Not normal people. So anyways, we have to understand that if someone lived to be 70 or 80, they went through 7 or 8 Shmitas, 9, 10 Shmitas. The whole society revolves around Shabbat. And the truth, the way that we honor Shabbat, we love Shabbat, we feel the ambience of Shabbat, you could feel the ambience of Shemitah. So I have to say is, because Baruch Hashem, I've been working the land around my house for a long time. When Shemitah comes, it's like for real. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not doing something in the yard. Not a day, except for Shabbos. And sometimes a lot of work in the yard, but every day something. Pruning, raking, fertilizing, planting, mowing, watering. Every day is something. Comes to Shemitah, we'll learn what you can and can't do, but still, the major things you don't do. And every Shemitah, I make it a practice that I'd go out in my yard and I would try to feel that this is a Shabbat for the land. The land is resting. And to try to feel that, and it's a real thing. Again, if someone works their land day and night for 6 years and then Shemitah comes, and all of a sudden they're actually free to do other things, that's where the idea of a sabbatical comes from. A professor, teaches for 6 years, but he's expected to write and produce papers and books and everything, so they have a sabbatical. Sabbatical is not really a vacation for a year. A sabbatical, in a technical sense, is when professors are expected to produce material. For us, when Shemitah came, people were free to learn Torah. Free to learn Torah. They're not working. You could do the minimum. We could learn about it. But people were free. It was a different reality. Shemitah was a different reality. Right now, for better or for worse, most people in Israel, their only connection to Shemitah is which store am I shopping at to get my fruits and vegetables. That's the decision. Or, Baruch Hashem, almost everyone here has, our pots outside and the trees but Shemitah is real. We have to know what to do with it. But in Yerushalayim, where most of the people live in apartments, or Haifa or Tel Aviv, and if you're religious, Shemitah is where do I buy a vegetable? Which restaurants can I go to? It was a different reality then.
I heard something really good about that. We were at a wedding, one of Rosh's students. Actually, her parents used to come to the Moshav and buy granola from us, the neighbor. And I was sitting next to someone who was mixed. It was, wasn't mixed. It was separate. And they were talking about Shemitah. And the guy said, "Whatever works for my wife is okay with me." A really firm guy, and that's the Shemitah I believe in. Whatever makes your wife comfortable. Okay. Don't be a big tzaddik if the cucumber came from here or came from there. Whatever makes your wife comfortable. Okay.
Okay, we'll learn the different shitas.
Quote me on that.
Okay, we're going to finish up here. So, obviously, by connecting to Shemitah, we're connecting to a divine cycle of time. God gave us a divine cycle of time, and we're fitting into it. And it's not just Shabbat and Shemitah. We just went through 7 weeks of counting the Omer. There's the 3 holidays happened the first 7 months of the year. The 3 Aliyat Regel, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot are all in the first 7 months. And you have Shemitah, then you have 7 times 7 Shemitah, and then you have the 6,000 years. That's why we're anticipating Mashiach. It's the same cycle. And so by keeping Shemitah, we are connecting ourselves to a divine cycle. And the last thing I want to say is one of the verses in the Torah says, God says, "The land is mine, you are sojourners with me." So God says it very clearly, the land is mine. That's why if you study Yovel, their concept of land ownership is completely different than ours. Because every 50th year, the land would revert to the original owners. We look at ownership very differently. It's like forever. But it wasn't like that then. It wasn't like that. It would revert to the family and the tribe. It was the society was very tribal in those days. And so even if you worked the land for 49 years, that you had leased it from someone else, it goes back.
So this whole thing happened with those Arab families who didn't pay rent to the Jewish organization, and then the whole war broke out a few weeks ago. But maybe it was over, that whole condition.
It could.
Okay, I didn't say anything.
It could be connected.
Where do you see your contract
Is that a
from
new
the
Rabbi?
Mitzvah? It's also connected.
Yep.
There you go, go, yo,
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And then another 49.
Yep.
That's it.
And all the kibbutzim in Eretz Yisrael are on a 49-year lease. The kibbutz technically does not own their land. Technically. Where do they get it from? The Torah.
Sometimes they give a 98-year lease also, yeah.
Oh, okay.
99, 99.
Okay.
We're getting 98 because it's 2 times 49.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so we'll end with a bracha. Shemitah is coming. And Baruch Hashem, every year more and more farmers are making a big attempt to keep Shemitah. Still very far from a majority. But the main thing we were trying to learn today is behind all of these mitzvot, because again, if you just jump into the mitzvahs and you have to do it this way and you have to do it this way, we have to understand what's the foundation behind it. Hopefully we got just a touch. And Bezrat Hashem, on the merit of keeping Shemitah, so God should bring the 7,000th year closer with Mashiach Tzidkenu.